All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for folks to join. If you want to pop in the webinar chat and let us know where you're joining in from today, we'd love to get a sense of where folks are in the world. All right, seeing North Carolina, folks in Ireland and London. You're in good company there with Poppulo. All over the world. Wonderful. I am in Michigan. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome.
Oh, I even see some familiar names there. Look, it's the famous Kim Polari. Oh my gosh, we've got New Yorkers in here. Oh, nice. Wow, people from London, Charlotte, Bristol in the UK, Amsterdam. What a pretty city Amsterdam is, isn't it?
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's kick things off. So let's get started. My name is Heather Bicknell. I'm on the marketing team here at Poppulo, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to our discussion all about the change opportunity, how internal comms fuels organizational success. So as we know, change is really an inevitable fact of business, and it often meets resistance from employees. So why exactly do employees struggle with change? How can effective communications help bridge the gap? That's what we're here to discuss today. We're going to delve into really the employee motivation gap, talk about how unnecessary stress, lack of alignment often turns change into more of a threat than an opportunity. And along the way, we're going to share some exclusive early results from a recent survey that Poppulo conducted all about how communications impacts change. So very excited to share those results with you today. And at the end, we'll also share some strategies that communicators can use to successfully drive change. But before we dive into the content, just a couple quick housekeeping notes for today's webinar. So first, as you've already started to do, we highly encourage you to continue to use the chat function. You know, you're all here as professionals, eager to learn and exchange information. So definitely feel free to drop your own thoughts, advice, learnings from your own careers along the way throughout today's webinar. Highly encouraged. If you have a question that you'd like Ethan or myself to answer, the best way to make sure that we see it is to actually use the Q&A box in Zoom and not the chat function. Just we can see it more easily on the back end when it comes through, so we won't miss it. And then finally, the webinar is being recorded. It's going to be shared with you afterward, along with the full report, the summary of the survey findings, and that should be coming to you all next week. So keep an eye on your inbox after the webinar today. And then just quickly, for those who are maybe less familiar with Poppulo, what we do is we help today's biggest global organizations deliver transformative communications experiences and ones that reach, engage, and inspire all of your employees. So that amounts to more than 50 million employees reached globally across more than 4,500 organizations. With the Poppulo platform, communicators can publish and measure targeted, personalized content across a variety of channels such as email, digital signage, mobile app, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and more, all backed by enterprise-grade performance, scale, and security. And I am absolutely thrilled today to be joined by Ethan McCarty of Integral. Ethan, over to you to introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks, Heather. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Looks like people are in many, many time zones here. I'm Ethan McCarty. As Heather mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Integral. Integral is an agency focused on employee experience. We really look at employee communications, top to bottom, digital workplace, all in, transformations, communication tools, all those kind of things, culture and change in organizations and as drivers of strategy and employee experience, which is part of the reason why I'm here talking with you all. I also led employee communications at scale for two very large organizations, IBM for many years, and then for Bloomberg for a bunch of years as well. And in the latter role, I was actually a Poppulo customer and used it during some pretty, let's say, consequential moments of communications and change and transformation for that organization. So I have a good sense for what it means to be, kind of in the role, and have been advising clients with my team at Integral for the last 6.5 years. So it'll be a pleasure to, first of all, for me to get to see some of the research early that Poppulo has been doing, and then to share some insights from my team and our work with our clients.
Fabulous. All righty. So what are we get to get into today? So first, I'm going to quickly introduce you to our full webinar series that's based on this idea of the hierarchy of change and motivation. And then we'll dive into why it's really not just you. Change actually has gotten harder for employees, unfortunately. And then we'll look at our new research, our Change Comms survey, and then finally we'll discuss some practical strategies again that you can use to support employees through change with more effective communications. And then we'll make sure we leave some time at the end for just open Q&A as well. And we'll try to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A as those come in too throughout the webinar. Okay, so this webinar, if you weren't aware, is actually the first in a 4-part series that's dedicated to one of the most pressing challenges that organizations today face, which is how to manage the rapid pace of change. And if you've ever taken like a Psych 101 course, you'll probably be familiar with this framework for understanding human motivation. This is all based on the theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has really long been used in change management just as a way to help leaders wrap their arms around the different elements that need to be in place for employees to really get on board with change. And we've distilled this pyramid, traditionally 5 elements, really into 3 key themes as they apply to sort of the workplace and communications. And these are basic needs, belonging, and growth. And along the way, we have awesome speakers like Ethan. We'll also bring you folks coming from Deloitte, Wipro, Change Oasis, who will have really a host of expert insights and strategies all about helping you get change right. So that's from understanding how internal comms impacts change to unpacking things like EVP misalignment, learning how to activate internal change champions, and more. So you can follow the link that Christine just shared in the chat to sign up for the full series and the next webinar on that EVP topic, as well as some additional resources on change communications in our Change Comms Hub. So today we're going to look at the foundation of this pyramid, really the role of communications in establishing a cadence of the right information to help employees push past what is quite naturally a human fear of change and the unknown. So let's get started. Let's get into it. Why is change so hard? So having worked with thousands of companies, we really know that the key driver of internal communications is often connecting people to drive business outcomes. And in nearly all cases, that's underpinned by that need is motivating employees to embrace some form of transformation. Let's face it, organizational change has become more and more commonplace. We need to keep up with technology, changing market landscapes, and employees are understandably quite change fatigued at this point. And this is backed actually by research from Gartner that's shown that since 2016, the pace of major change initiatives has accelerated from 2 a year to 10 a year. So it's, a 5x shift. And at the same time, employees' self-reported willingness to change has declined over 30%. And so what this has created is what Gartner has coined the transformation deficit, which is really a growing gap between what companies need to do in order to survive and thrive in the future and the employee support that they need to make that transformation possible. And I know, Ethan, you've done also some great research here on sort of this employee perspective. Would you like to share what you've learned from your point of view?
Sure thing. So each year, my firm Integral does some research with the Harris Poll. It's called the Integral Index, and our next publication is coming out pretty soon. I wanted to just put a couple data points here. This is separate, just to be clear. This is separate from the research that we're going to discuss in greater detail. But every change is not just a technological change or a mechanical change or a change of process or business requirements and so on. It's an emotional journey that people go through. And so in the Integral Index, we look at overall employee experience and relate that to behaviors in the market, like in the workplace. And so the employee experience comprises many different elements. It's like, my personal values and my identity as an individual and how that syncs up or misaligns with that of my organization's stated values and brand identity and so on. My political beliefs, my sort of like social, my understanding of my place in society. And then, of course, like things like the tools I'm using every day at work and, do I have a good relationship with my manager and so on. Well, all of those things change the way I will behave at work because they change how I feel. They change what I know, what I believe to be true. And so these are just 4 points from our survey that was in the field about a year ago uh, that demonstrate a couple points that are relevant to the ability to accommodate change that Heather was just talking about. So first of all, the majority of employees, and so this is a study of 2,000 employees in North America. The majority of employees believe that their employer actually considers employees when making decisions. That's 63%. I would say that's not a very good grade. So I mean that's in the US, that's a D, that's a D minus almost, in terms of whether or not employees believe that their needs and their perspectives and so on will be integrated and considered when making big strategic decisions at the enterprise. That's a bit higher, and we're very happy to see a little bit higher. 70% of employees believe that in the process of work and in their day-to-day at work, that their employers are generally treating them fairly and justly. And so that's a good metric. But still, if you're thinking about, back to Heather's point about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, will my needs be met at that higher level in that hierarchy that Maslow advanced of, these notions of justice and fairness that are sort of towards the top. It's actually, we're in a precarious position to say that fully a third of employees don't think that those needs may be met. They don't know that they will be treated fairly. The next one is around digital tools. So we always ask, I mean, this is our fourth year doing this study. We ask about digital transformation and tools and so on. And generally speaking, almost 70% of folks think that digital tools are actually going to help them do their jobs better. Things like the introduction of AI and so on. But fully a third, 31%, or just shy of a third actually, think, oh, well, these new tools, they're actually gonna be risky for me. Like that might take away opportunity for me. And again, like many of the transformations in play tend to be the introduction of technologies or change in systems and so on. So if you are doing some kind of change effort, you should know that probably 2/3 around, of folks there think that may actually come at a cost to them, or I'm sorry, a third of them may believe that comes as a cost to them, and maybe a third of them are, that third of them are they might be genuinely concerned that they might lose their job or they might lose status, personal status, which is very important to people. The last stat on the page is just a reflection of whether or not people think the company cares about them. So we found that and we do all kinds of cuts in our report, and I'll drop a link in the chat, and then someone has kindly added, Christine, thank you. So there's a link in the chat, and we'll circulate that afterwards as well. We do all kinds of cuts. One is by generation, and there are some major differences between generations. So Whereas about 72% of Gen Xers, that's my crew, believe that their employers care about them. Only 56% of Gen Zers do. So again, when you think about your receptivity to change that might ask of you to make some kind of sacrifice or encounter some difficulty or get through a challenge or some kind of friction, um, if you feel like you are cared about, we know that there's a correlation between that sense of care and belief that the company's best days are ahead of it and that you'll be part of it. And so you then become more willing to engage in that transformation work, that change work.
I think that is really insightful and really speaks to, I think you've hit on a lot of the top ones here around why, the reasons that we see employees being resistant to change. Just another stat I would throw in there from Gartner as well is that nearly 3/4 of employees say that when they're affected by change, they report experiencing moderate to high stress levels. So there's sort of this natural response, again, going back to really the psychology of change. Our bodies haven't quite caught up to understand, the difference between like a grizzly bear standing in front of us and a new ERP system. So it can really, trigger a lot of emotions and not, sometimes rational, sometimes not. But that fear of the unknown is definitely like a major driver, and one that obviously communications by injecting information, by telling people, the day-to-day impact to expect on their jobs can really help alleviate a lot of those concerns. Ethan, is there anything else, from your experience, other factors that you found lead to things like frustration, employee resistance? What have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things that we probe on, for years, that was kind of like we know instinctively is if an organization's values that are declared and demonstrated by leadership and demonstrated in sort of reified in policies and so on, if those align with somebody's self-conception of their personal values, you get like all of these knock-on positive events and effects. And if they misalign, you also get these knock-on negative effects. And so one of the things that can drive change resistance is a misalignment between, sort of like the employee population's understanding of and personal conception of their own beliefs and values by comparison to what's being demonstrated or espoused by their organization. And so this is where we think there's a lot of value for communications teams in particular to create an abundance of authentic signals about why a change initiative is tied back to the identity of the company, why you're actually here, the behaviors that are actually valued and actually valued, not just declared to be valued. And so if you see those kind of factors in play in an organization, where there's a strong sense of shared purpose and shared values, you then see the receptivity to change increase significantly. And part of that is that, people are just like, oh, okay, that's like, it's rationalized to something greater than the bottom line. Or if it's been rational, if this change initiative has been rationalized just to the bottom line, it's because it's existential, or I see myself as part of a beneficiary of that, either because I'll have greater stability in my life or economic outcomes or what have you, but also because it does not create that sense of cognitive dissonance where it's like, oh God, this change is really contrary to my values and I have to go do it anyway. And that's just painful. Nobody wants to walk around all day thinking, like having to hold, this idea of yourself that is somehow, in conflict with this idea of shared identity that is at odds with that sense of one's own identity. So, that I think it really does have a lot to do what I just described with that third layer of lack of trust in leadership, because so very often the way values are experienced by employees is you see your leaders behaving in certain ways and you're like, okay, that's what we actually value.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've been kind of focused a lot on the challenge and what makes it hard, and that's just to really validate, the scope of what's facing a lot of organizations today. But just from more of the hopeful side, this is research by McKinsey that's actually backed up. We know the critical importance of internal communications for businesses today, and a lot of that has to do with the impact communications can have when it comes to change success. So McKinsey's looked at a number of drivers of what makes some changes fail and what makes some changes stick. And the number one driver that they've identified aligned to success is actually communications and can have a really big impact. So looking at a couple just examples of how this comes to life. So organizations are nearly 4 times more successful when they communicate consistently on business goals, over 4 times when they communicate the day-to-day employee impact. So going back to the sort of what's in it for me conversation, and then a full 8 times when they communicate progress with transparency. So I think that comes back to, echoes a lot of what you were just saying there, Ethan, in terms of what, the employee perspective is. And that just goes to show, the importance of what we can do here in terms of, being the voice of the organization, facilitating those communications, and those two-way dialogues as well. So let's talk about, the new research that we've done here. And just to highlight, so we went into this research knowing that, of course, we're big believers in the impact effective communication has on change initiatives. We see it in the work our clients do every day, and we've seen it backed by research from folks like McKinsey. But we really wanted to dig that next layer deeper to understand how are communicators tackling change management today? What factors within those communications are the most important for driving successful change? Kind of unpacking what does it mean for communications to contribute to change success. And to do this, we partnered with a global insight-driven research company, Census-wide, and they supported the design and distribution of our survey. We collected responses from more than 1,000 professional communicators at mid and large size organizations that were split between the US and UK, really represented a range of industries, with the top ones being technology, healthcare, and manufacturing. But we saw folks from a variety of verticals. And the majority of respondents were from enterprises with more than 5,000 employees and represented primarily director and above roles. And we did this intentionally. We really wanted to capture more of a leadership perspective on change. And that's mainly because the folks responsible and seen as the face of change are often higher up within the company. So we were keen to understand, how does this audience really ultimately judge the success of internal change and communications impact on it? And really the first thing we wanted to understand from this audience was how they define change communications. And to do this, we asked them to choose the closest match from this list to describe the communications that had an element of change they were involved in most frequently at their organizations. So operational changes, this represented things like process changes, health and safety updates. Organizational communications were more aligned to culture, surveys, employee recognition programs. Leadership comms were defined as changing business priorities, new company values, et cetera. And then finally, change and transformation encompassed things like digital transformation and security-related changes. And what we saw is actually kind of a surprisingly even split of the results here, with leadership and change and transformation ultimately being the most common types of changes that were being communicated about. And what this suggested is a higher prevalence of changes related to ultimately core business strategy and new technology were sort of the most prevalent, but different kinds of changes happening across the board here. We also found that communicators are maybe unsurprisingly, very involved in communicating change initiatives. So 93% of respondents said that they send change communications at least once per month. However, interestingly, not all communicators are necessarily given a seat at the table when it comes to, being brought in early and helping determine that change strategy. So we found that roughly half said they were viewed as a partner to their leadership, helping to guide the strategy, which is great. But a little under half also said that they take more of a supportive role when it comes to executing on leadership's change plans. So I think what is interesting here, we know from research done earlier this year from Gallagher and their State of the Sector report that they found that when communicators are more strategic, employee understanding improves. And that, when communicators report that they're in a strategic role, employees are more likely to say that they understand communications at a good or excellent level, compared to when communicators are more of that advisory or supporting role. So I think it just really highlights that there's a lot of value when it comes to the long-term impact of, communicators getting a seat at that strategy table and not sort of being left out of that part of the equation. Ethan, I'd love, from your own experience or other research you've done, what would you add regarding how early do you think IC should, be brought in to change initiatives and should be advocating for that?
Well, I'd be kind of selling my own book here if I was like early, early, early. As a lifelong employee communications professional, obviously I do want to advocate for our profession. I do also think you can make a more powerful argument than "Hey, boss, include me," by showing up with your business acumen and understanding of the behaviors that need to change, as opposed to showing up with your claim to be an effective storyteller and ownership of channels, because the latter sort of positions you as a value-added postal worker. That's not to say that that's not important, but like if that's how you position yourself as like a storyteller who has access to the send button, well, they're going to sort of engage with you in that way, which is like a downstream moment to engage internal comms or employee comms. Whereas if you show up, really understanding the business necessity and the business drivers behind whatever the change is at hand, whether it's an operational change or a technological change or what have you, the organization changing. If you show up with a real understanding of that business and of that business strategy behind that change, and with your understanding, your nuanced understanding of the employee population, not just in terms of information preferences, do they want an email or a digital sign or a tweet or whatever, but what's going on psychographically for them. Where do you think the what's in it for me is most wanting in your current plan versus what needs to be cranked up? Those are the kinds of things that get you invited into a conversation about like, all right, help us with the strategy behind this change, as opposed to help us with communicating the change after we've already made these strategic decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Those audience sort of insights on the message, incredibly valuable and important to bring to the table. Okay, so we know that we're communicating about change a lot. Not super surprising. How confident are we in the effects of those communications? So what we found is sort of a mix of confidence levels here. So around half of communicators are, believe that their change comms are very effective. They think that they can measure them effectively and that they're able to reach employees effectively as well. So this is interesting. We sort of see the split between those who are super high confidence and those who think there's still maybe some room for improvement. And of those who did rate their organization's ability to measure the efficacy of change comms as effective, there was really a strong correlation, 93%, who also rated their ability to communicate change as effective. So there's this really strong link that we found in the data as well between measurement and those who felt that their change comms were more successful there. So there seems to be, that insights portion playing a large role here as well.
If I had a chance, Heather, to ask a follow-up question in this study and,
Yeah,
maybe in future iterations,
write it down.
we'd be able to do that. But it would be, I think the first thing would be, all right, this is how we as a profession rate ourselves, and it's not great, it's 47%. But is it? Because I mean that's what I read at the first glance. I think probably in encountering this question, internal communications professionals are going to be like, yeah, rating their own capabilities. But I think they're also going to be thinking about how effective is my leadership at communicating these changes? Like how, how well do we show up as an organization in moments of, in moments of, critical change? And so I think, I think there's some nuance here that I think would be worth exploring at some point. And that, I mean, this is one of those things where, you ask communicators how they would rate communications. It would be also interesting to pose the same question to people in their organizations. Obviously, you can't do that because this is a study of communicators, but many people believe that their organizations are, very, very poor at communicating change. And so I would not be surprised actually to see numbers that might even be lower if you ask the people in these organizations. So relative to like a scale of out of 100, these look like bad scores. Relative to potentially how people, rate their, the employees, as sort of recipients of these communications, rate their organization's ability to change, it might be high. But that would be an interesting thing to unpack. And, I'd be interested if anybody has done research like that within their own organizations. I'm sure, the other 135 people on this call would also be interested. If you're willing to share it, drop it in the chat. I think we'd all like to see that.
Yeah, no, if anyone has insights on that, do share. I think that's also some great feedback. I love doing these sort of surveys year on year because then you can, you don't really know exactly what insight you're going to find until you find it. Then you can go back the next time and
Yeah.
dig into there deeper. So logging that one away for next year. So we did actually find also when we were looking through the data some interesting differences based on a couple of vectors, and one of which we found some differences on workforce composition. So there was interestingly, a much stronger belief in the effectiveness of communications among those who were communicating only with in-office employees. So they felt more likely to feel that their change comms were very effective. And that's contrasted with really a mix of, percentages in the 30s for companies with mixtures of working styles. They were able to sort of, select were they in office, hybrid, remote, frontline. So what you're seeing at the top there is those who had a combination of all of those within their organization. So I thought this was fascinating. I mean, it's possible that maybe it's easier to reach employees when you're in person. You do something like a mass group event, and you feel like, well, everyone was reached. I also thought maybe there's a bias because we surveyed leaders. Maybe they're more likely to feel that they can really see and assess, that change is landing when they can see people in person. I don't know, Ethan, what are your thoughts when you see this breakdown?
Well, I think we're all struggling with the extension of culture to hybrid working modalities. I mean, we're all like, okay, well, we used to think we had it because everybody would walk in and there'd be like the foosball table, like, okay, we have culture here, whatever, whatever the things are that made up your physical workspaces, and we could all see them and touch them and whatever. And so much of our ability to effectively accommodate change as an organization comes down to what kind of culture we have. And, now that the bubble's kind of been lanced on, the physical workspace is the alpha and omega of workplace culture. And we all know that. I think we're all kind of living in that sort of uncomfortable space of trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we make the culture and this feeling of shared identity and purpose and extensible to people who are working in all kinds of modalities. They might not be in a factory floor or a retail location or an office all the time as they once were. And that even though that might have been kind of a fantasy or magical thinking, it's still like that thing that has fallen apart. And so some of our own confidence in our ability to, to say like we are communicating change well, we are bringing people along. I think that's been similarly degraded, and we see also in in integral study, we see some real variation in terms of how people perceive the culture, by comparison to where they work.
Interesting. Such an evolving topic still. Another way that we saw sort of some divides in the data is in the confidence or on the ability to reach all employees. So this varied by a few lenses. First, we found that the more senior the leader, the more effective they believe their reach to be. So this one was sort of interesting. I think it's possible that, the middle management, senior management, maybe they're a little bit closer to the day-to-day impact of that change on employees. They might have a different perception on, did our messages really reach employees versus more senior leadership. So that was one interesting divide. And then this second finding, maybe a little bit more intuitive, which is that smaller organizations were more confident in their ability to reach everyone than large organizations, which makes sense. We know that communication sort of complexity increases at scale. Things like different geographies, different worker populations can obviously add to that complexity and make reach harder. Ethan, anything else you'd add, or how do you interpret these findings?
Well, there's two things I would add. I mean, one is that when you ask people about who is most sort of representative of the best attributes of a company, and you ask them like, okay, frontline workers, their managers and direct supervisors, middle management, senior leaders. You'll see that everybody basically selects their own tranche. And so, like it doesn't actually, it shouldn't surprise anybody to say, if we ask, okay, where do you think the most receptivity of change, will be in the organization? They're very likely to select themselves if they see that as a positive attribute. And one of the things that didn't even occur to me to contemplate before we look, before this moment, as we're looking at this, is that it'd be interesting to look at how this breakdown actually maps to the demography of your sample. Like it might be that people are like basically like, yeah, the middle managers, think that they can, that they are the most effective agents of change, and and the business owners think they are, or so on. So that's one thing. And then the other one is, as you pointed out, just like as organizations grow, as they're larger, you just have these, the inherent sort of growth of complexity in networks. The bigger, like when you add one person to a 3-person team, you haven't increased the, the complexity by one, out of the, you haven't gone from 3 to 4. You've gone from like, 12 connections to whatever it is, 24 connections or 36 or whatever. Like it basically, it's like this like spiral of complexity. The larger organizations are, as you add people, it's like more connections have to happen in the network, and therefore things like everybody, you know, taking collective action gets way more complicated because you have, many more connections, a greater sort of social distance and power distance and all these kind of things within that organization. So we see that in our research as well. Like, if you ask people, like, is your culture, one where you feel welcome and you feel like you belong, the smaller the organization, the better they're going to perform. Likewise, I mean, I think, and this just bears it out, that the smaller the organization, the more likely that you're going to have the ability to reach everybody and probably to do so authentically and persuasively.
Absolutely. We just have a couple more slides in the findings, and then we'll flip over to discuss some of the strategies, but just one other point to share. So as we discussed earlier from that McKinsey research, we know that there's a really strong link between communications and change effectiveness. We were curious to see, would our survey respondents sort of echo that same sentiment? What was their perception? So nearly 60% believe that they can clearly show how communications impact employee actions. So I think that's actually, even though there's, that's still that 43% gap, maybe stronger than I was anticipating, even in terms of how clearly they could tie that thread. 39% were more in the camp of believing communications help employees adopt change, but not being able to prove it. That's, a really common challenge that we see. And then encouragingly, or maybe confusingly, just 4% say that they haven't attempted to tie their change outcomes to their comms efforts. So I think it's good to see that being a pretty low percentage, but still we'd like that to be, zero, of course. And then we found that also, again, smaller companies felt more positively about their ability to prove that change impact than larger enterprises. So I think, again, just shows that kind of complexity at scale conversation as well here. And then just to highlight, again, some of the top challenges that we did see when it came to proving the impact of change communication. So almost half of communicators agreed, even though there's some confidence, that tying communications back to business priorities was their top challenge. And then other top challenges that we saw ranging, around a third of respondents felt that the ability to reach everyone, the ability to measure, and the ability to personalize communications were their other real top challenges when it came to, their ability to communicate change. And our last sort of stat slide before we move into more of the strategy discussion. So another piece that we wanted to understand was the impact comm software has when it comes to communicating change. We're often thinking about, do we have, the right resource investments and technology? What's really the impact of software when it comes to all of this? So 50% of respondents strongly felt that their comm software plays an essential role in driving change. And then there was a larger group of 89% who said it somewhat or completely plays a role in driving change. And, just to call out some of the awesome Poppulo customers, we found that there was also, we surveyed a population of just Poppulo customers and then of general communicators overall. And we found that 80% of respondents who were using Poppulo said that they're viewed as a change partner by their leadership compared to only 53% of communicators. We also found that Poppulo customers said they were stronger in personalization. So 90% reported that they can personalize their email content, and that was compared to just 53% of communicators overall. So just to add, you don't have to take my word for it. Poppulo customers are amazing. And if you're interested in learning more about how we can help you support your employees through better comms targeting, personalization, and measurement, we have just a quick poll. If you're interested in learning more and speaking to someone at Poppulo, you're welcome to fill that out. And I think with that, that's a lot of data to digest. Again, we'll be sending out the full write-up and report to everyone. So there'll be more insights there for you to find. But, we have 15 minutes left. Want to make sure we have time to discuss some, practical, actionable strategies as well, and really get all of your wisdom here, Ethan, on, okay, so what do we do next? We sort of know some of the challenges. We know where we're at, state of play. What do we do with that information? So let's talk about some of the proven strategies for supporting employees through change. And the first one is all about listening. I'll toss it over to
Sure.
Ethan.
Yeah. I mean, we can kind of whip through these because I think they're, honestly, they're pretty accepted. Like you probably instinctively know this as professional communicators, and yet some of these things can be really hard to pull off for various reasons. But the first one is it's like what my grandpa and probably yours used to yell at you. You've got two ears and one mouth. Use them in that proportion. And so most employee communications teams aren't really that well equipped to do the listening part. But if you can make that, even if you can just say, look, we'd like to carve out like 10% of our budget and time for listening, and you're doing that in an ongoing basis, when the big strategic change moment comes, you're going to be so much better positioned, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, to go in as as a real partner in the change initiative, as opposed to the person who downstream is just meant to maybe wordsmith a memo and push it out. And so if you can be involved in. And very often this means a tight partnership with folks in HR or in operations or customer service, to be doing ongoing, even lightweight surveys and polls. It doesn't have to be $1 million research project. If you can be forming an employee sort of advocacy or ambassadorship group that you consult with periodically that has some representation across your lines of business. If you can be equipping managers, I like to say equip your managers, not just with talking points, but with listening points. If you have built that mechanism, and I really love what Bethany had said in the chat about, managers and first line managers being so essential and like wanting to have that, sort of intimacy. So if you can be equipping your organization to be listening as an ongoing kind of reflexive, activity, then habituated, then you're probably going to be in a lot more position of strength when it comes time to do a major transformation.
Absolutely. Segmentation, I think this comes back, we saw that challenge around personalizing. Would love to hear your thoughts here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that, this is now kind of like a long time ago that I deployed Poppulo. I mean, I think it was like almost like 8 years ago or something. But one of the things that my organization at the time was in the midst of doing a big upgrade on the HRIS system. So we had like really like much more improved. I mean, we had like 10,000 job roles and we had 19,000 employees, and the HR team had like done the work to narrow that down to like a reasonable set of job roles and stuff. So we were able to like sort of hardwire that into our deployment of Poppulo. So even just that job role level, like, if you receive something that's like, oh, hey, software developer, we think that this thing about software development might be useful to you. Like that is so powerful. And it is so, we all know that like the more personalized your sort of digital experience is, the more likely you are to engage with it. If there's a way to take that step further into the psychographic, so it's like we know certain things about people based on their behaviors, and we start to target them, with content or opportunities based on that. Like, if you've completed a whole bunch of courses on, management on your, your internal learning portal. Well, that person might be subtly indicating that they want to be a lead. Not subtly, they're pretty overtly indicating that they're, interested in being a leader at the organization. And if you can target that person or that group of people who've completed a bunch of management training or even like negotiation training or what have you, with some content that helps them be part of leading the change, that's quite different than just that same individual getting the same thing that everybody else got that says, hey, this change is happening, conform to it. So the more we can segment our audiences, and there's such an abundance of information about the people with whom we work, and so much of it is captured in digital sort of artifacts that are observable. The more we can avail ourselves of that, the more powerful it is. Obviously, I can't say that without also saying a note of caution. I mean, you never want to get into that point of segmentation and personalization and so on that becomes exclusive or that divides the organization, which could be at cross purposes to a transformation effort or change effort as well.
Absolutely, and I love that nugget about using different signals to sort of find the potential population of change champions, that engaged group. That is such a smart way to think about it. And then being able to, put them on a tagged list and send them something to activate them is so smart. So messaging, really key to fitting the needs of each audience. What would you add here, Ethan?
Well, it's a little bit of a build on the preceding one, but I would also say, one of the things that, we just keep on encountering in not just like the research that Integral does, but you can see it in the research that Gartner, Gallup, Glint, and all the other Gs that are out there, Gatehouse, they're all doing research that indicates that, there's this real relationship between whether or not I believe I'm going to succeed at this organization and will put the extra effort in, and whether or not I think that this organization's best days are ahead of it or not. And so if in a moment of change, you can really get clear maybe it's on a job role level or on a hierarchical level or psychographic level or a regional level of what's in it for me as an employee to be part of this change. So that the message to me helps me understand the benefit to me personally and also allays any of my fears. Like, can you say like, okay, well, look, we're going to roll out name the AI system, right? And actually, we're going to be really clear about how we think that this is going to augment your career as opposed to, denigrate or diminish your opportunity. Getting at that, what's in it for me on like the most sort of segmented, tailored level. Like if you could do it for each individual in your organization, that would be amazing. But if you have more than a dozen or so colleagues, you're probably not going to do that. So you have to, use a little bit of segmentation and messaging houses.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Love that comment, Brianna, around setting communications from a specific person can be more impactful than a generic sender. We see that a lot as well in sort of Poppulo customer data, and that's something that you can, of course, experiment with. If your platform has the ability to sort of ghost write, ghost send as a particular leader. Another element that we see a lot of power in is that localization, feeling like, oh, I recognize that person's name, that even giving them, the opportunity to just sort of put their own flair or spin on that message to make sure that, it is communicating what is relevant to each, local audience as well is so key in terms of employees feeling like, okay, I'm, this change isn't happening to me, I'm a part of this change. I understand, my role in all of this as well. Channels, we love them here at Poppulo, of course, but channels are your channel strategy, right? It matters. We've gotten questions as well, prior to this webinar, how do we sort of think about the channels that are right for change? I would say that, of course, you want to focus on what your employee makeup is, what channels reach different segments the best. Some channels are really good at amplifying messages. So one that is really strong for that is digital signage. So, a couple of years ago at Poppulo, we had a big brand transformation. We used our internal digital signage to really be part of that moment to reinforce, here's our new brand visuals, our values, share all of that and sort of have that repeat messaging. Of course, it's mostly for the in-person audiences on that front. And you can echo that, across your other channels as well. But Ethan, what have you found when it comes to balancing?
I think you nailed it, Heather. I mean, the one thing that I would add is something that folks brought up in the chat earlier is like, what are your first line managers? Like, not just talking points, but like, did you actually equip them to do some of the emotional labor in a change? Like people are going to come to first line managers with like all kinds of stuff, and like, are they equipped at any level to deal with that in service of the change initiative? I know we have one more like little strategy thing here, and I don't want to rush you on the close. So do you want to go to that last one? And
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just two more
yeah,
slides
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
not sure we'll have too much time for questions today, but we'll absolutely be following up with folks to get those answered as well. So finally, last but certainly important is, making sure you're doing the measurement piece that can often get skipped. We move from initiative to initiative, but this is how we learn from it and also ideally optimize along the way, right?
There's been such a lively conversation in the chat that, I
Mm.
feel like I hope folks feel like the Q&A has been satisfied a little bit, but obviously I'd be very happy to connect with folks later and you're going to get all kinds of wonderful follow-up from Poppulo. The one thing I would just add to this observation around measurement. I mean, this is work that my team at Integral does. We actually have like a whole insights practice, and is that there's at the end of the day, there's kind of two categories of measurement that most teams really need to focus on. One is like, the sort of operational and optimization measures. Like, is the tactic actually working? Like, if you sent an email, like, did it arrive at people's inboxes? Did people open it? If you've pressed publish on digital signage or on an intranet site or whatever, did it actually hit the glass? And those things that's really good measurement for like getting better. Like, oh, that one didn't get opened as much. Like maybe we changed something, right? And then there's the outcome metrics, and those are generally expressed in behaviors that are observed. And so it'd be like, did people adopt a new tool, or did they start selling the new product, or did they speak with customers in a new way, or or did they adopt that new safety practice, in the manufacturing environment or whatever, and generally speaking, the optimization metrics are focused on making the team better, and the outcome metrics are what's going to land you your budget next year and be like really meaningful to the leadership of the company. And unfortunately, the one's a lot easier to measure than the other. One is more correlation, one is more or one is more obviously caused, and one is more correlative. But having a sense at the outset of what are some of those operational metrics and those optimization metrics. My last word on this is that there's a third category of measurement that we like to encourage our clients to look at, and that's the employee metrics. Like, did things get better for employees? Would they say that things have gotten better for employees? Did they get easier? Did they get harder? Do they believe that? Were they able to avail themselves of new resources and so on? Did they find that to be stressful? Did they find it to be easy? Do they feel more or less connected to the organization?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's such a powerful note to end on. Just wanted to, as we wrap up here, highlight the next webinar upcoming in the series once more. If you haven't signed up yet, it's coming up fast, September 25th. You'll hear from Leona O'Sullivan, Employee Brand Manager at Deloitte Ireland, as well as Josh Matheson, Chief Encouragement Officer, which is the super fun job title at Change Oasis. And they're going to discuss the impact of misaligned employer value propositions on change initiatives and sort of how to course correct if you find yourself, facing that dilemma. You don't want to miss this one. So you can follow the link in the chat, or, if you're multitasking away on your phone and you want to use the QR code, you can give that a try. And I know, we just have a minute left here. So wanted to thank you all for your active participation. Really lively and valuable discussion in the chat. So thank you. We always love seeing that. And we'll definitely be, following up with any additional answers to your questions. But really hope that everyone has a lovely rest of the day. And we're so excited to, look forward to seeing you on the next one. And thanks again, Ethan, for joining us today. It was a great conversation.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks so much, Heather. And thanks to everybody. I really enjoyed it. And thanks again to the folks at Poppulo for convening us and for doing this research, which is really important to our profession.
Oh, thank you. We love doing it.